I've heard it said that if a person's religious affiliation is unknown, then we shouldn't be taking advice from them. Do you agree with this? What about in the case of popular musicians and other cultural leaders? Okay, so do I think that we should factor in a person's religious affiliation, and if it's unknown, maybe we shouldn't take advice from them? Well, I guess it depends on the advice that they're giving. Right? I mean, obviously, if it's advice about dental hygiene, then I don't really care what their religious affiliation is. If it's advice, they could be an atheist, they could be a Hindu, they could be a Jehovah's Witness. I'm not sure it really matters to me at that point. If it's about morality, if it's advice about moral and ethical principles, then yeah, I think it would matter. It would matter to me if what their worldview is. Obviously, if they're an atheist, that would affect how much I consider what they're saying. If they're a Hindu or coming from a pantheistic worldview, that would affect how I perceive the value of their advice. If they identify as a progressive Christian, so say, hey, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I'm a progressive Christian, that's going to affect the way I perceive their advice as well. So it really depends on what kind of advice that they're giving, because I don't think the question here says what kind of, it just says, should we be taking their advice? It depends on what kind of advice they're giving and I guess who it is, right? Now, I'll admit, because they're talking here about popular musicians and other cultural leaders. Again, I think it would depend on who the popular musician is and what kind of advice they're giving. And the reason I say this is because I think it's somewhat inherent. It's an inherent challenge to anybody who's on stage and is performing in some sense in front of an audience. I think there's an inherent challenge to that. So, and I'm talking about myself as well. So I don't perform in the same way as a musician does, but in the sense that I do get up on stage and I speak to an audience, and there is part of my goal, not all of it, but part of my goal is to, I don't want to say please the audience, but I do want to satisfy them in a sense of, hey, I'm giving you what you came here for. And of course I want to be entertaining and funny and likable and so on and so forth. And of course, musicians and popular rock stars or whatever will probably do the same thing. But I would just say that there is an inherent challenge to that, because there's a temptation to not want to say things or do things that would alienate a segment of your crowd. And I think, and maybe this is where this question is going, that you'd find maybe Christian artists who have maybe compromised on certain morals or biblical principles or sexual ethics pertaining to homosexuality or LGBT-related topics, because they realize that a lot of their fans might be people who would be supportive of homosexuality or being trans or whatever it might be. And so if they say something that is consistent with what the Bible teaches, but that is at odds with a segment of their audience, they're going to lose a portion of their audience, okay, or at least make those people upset. So this is why, yeah, maybe I would be hesitant to take advice from a Christian artist. But again, it depends on what they're giving advice on. I mean, obviously, if they're talking about their, how to play the guitar and they're a guitarist, then maybe I wouldn't care. But if they're talking about, sexual ethics and that's not really their lane, then I probably would be wanting to know what is their affiliation and whether I should consider what they're saying. Now, I'm not saying you can't stand for truth, by the way, if you're a Christian artist or if you're on stage. I mean, I know there's lots of examples of people who are able to do that and not compromise their convictions, and that's wonderful. I'm just saying that is a potential challenge that anybody who's in front of an audience faces, as well as I face as well, okay? But I think at the end of the day, what it's going to come down to is discernment. No matter who you're getting advice from, whether it's from your parent or your child or your friend or a peer or a coworker or a pastor or whoever, like anybody giving advice to you, you should receive it and then use your best judgment and discernment to test to see whether those things are true. maybe consult other people, maybe consider what Scripture says about it if it speaks to that subject, and so on and so forth. So I think that's important for you.